Stuart Holbrook has spent his life in the world of collectors. As president of Theriault, the world's leader in the auction of antique dolls and figurative art for over 30 years, he's managed the often personal and always wild world of collecting and collectors. His market expertise and knowledge of trends comes to life in The Curious Collector, where he shares his experience and experiences in real-life stories, alongside sage advice on how to build great collections within the happy life of a collector.
Welcome back to The Curious Collector. I'm Stuart Holbrook with you for episode 38 and a very, very special conversation with Susan Wright of Wright Dolls. There's very few companies or doll artists of the late 20th and early 21st century that resonate more with collectors across the world than Wright Dolls. Their vision, their craft, their style, their art really reached a number of different emotional connections to collectors and lovers of dolls in a way that had the styling and elements of the old done in the new, but tapping into the wonderful nostalgia of characters and personalities and figures that many of us have grown up with. Wright Dolls, for me, I've always felt, have transcended so many different types of collectors and people across the world of any doll that I've really ever seen. I have, in my travels, seen them in Australia and Europe and Japan, across America, Canada, South America, everywhere. They reached people in a visceral way almost, in a way that was connective and joyful. This is why I believe, of all the doll makers of the late 20th and early 21st century, the one who will be the most formative legend 100, 150, 200 years that we will look back upon like Marguerite Steiff or Kathy Cruz will be John Wright. Sadly, as they were approaching the 50th anniversary of the company and so many iconic designs over that time, last year, John Wright, the artist, passed away. Susan Wright is here with us today to talk more personally, deeply about the man behind the designs, their partnership, and the creative of Wright Dolls. Susan, welcome. I'm so happy you can be here. This is like sitting around the living room with an old friend because we have known each other for a long time. And our companies have kind of paralleled similar time frames over these 50 years. So I'm so happy to share this with you this day and conversation and have you tell a little more stories about your work and John Wright. And again, it's an honor. Thank you for being here.
Well, I'm honored to be involved with this podcast. Number 38, did you say? That's impressive.
It is.
I would like to take this opportunity to share some of the more personal aspects of John and my relationship and our building our company and the stories that a lot of people have never heard.
I think this is really an important opportunity to do this. And I'm sorry that John has passed away, but I think, as you heard in my intro, his legacy and your legacy, the partnership that you've built over the years in this company, will live on for generations. And that energy is a powerful thing. So sharing some of these stories is so important because I think it really adds to the allure and the desire for these items in the area of ownership, where people really will be like, I'm looking at a beautiful object, but I love their story as well. So Susan, tell me a little bit about, first of all, how you and John met. I think a lot of people may not know this.
A lot of people have heard this story, but it's a good one. So everybody has heard the story that we met in a bread factory. I was 19. He was 25. He had driven from Michigan, Detroit, when he was 21 in his bald-tired VW Volkswagen. He found a group of creative artisans in New Hampshire. He lived with them for a while. And then he did get the job in the bread factory in a nearby town. I had it as a summer job. And the moment I met him, I just knew this was the man I was going to spend the rest of my life with. There was just something like love at first sight. I don't think he felt that, but that's okay. We can work on that. But then, summer was over. I went back to school at the University of New Hampshire to finish my Bachelor of Fine Arts degree. He did a lot of this and that, harvesting apples, planting pansies, working just a lot of manual labor. But we did keep in touch in those years that I was finishing at school. And then he announced that he was going to be hitchhiking to Florida to pick oranges and work on his tan. And I said, well, I'm going to New York City to get my master's degree. And he says, well, I'll go with you and help you get set up. So he did. And it was wintertime when that happened. And he said, okay, well, I guess I'm going to start hitching. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go with you. And so we hitched south in the blizzard, and we arrived in Florida, and it was quite an adventure. We stayed there about 6 months. It was entertaining. We traveled back north, though, wanting to go to Vermont, to Brattleboro, Vermont. We didn't know anybody there, but we had heard it was a happening place in the 1970s, and a lot of very interesting cultural movements and such were happening. There was a restaurant there called the Common Ground Restaurant. It was one of the very first natural foods restaurants in the area. I thought, I'm a good cook. I should apply. They hired me, and after a while, I was kitchen manager and head chef. So that was a lot of fun. John got a job at a hardware store. He didn't like it all that much. He did it about a year, and then he got laid off, and he didn't know what else to do. And so he had always been interested in toys, puppets, dolls, creative things. And we had a friend who was making her living making little porcelain dolls, and maybe I could do that. So he went home. He used my small Singer featherweight sewing machine, which he didn't really know how to use, to make a doll, at least start making a doll. The bobbin ran out. He finished it with needle and thread in hand. And he came to meet me after work with it wrapped up in a little blanket. And he showed it to me, and he says, what do you think? And I said, I love it. Did you make this? Yeah, I did. Now, this was not the first doll. Basically, this was a very crude little head with a little hand sticking out of the blanket. So it wasn't a complete doll.
Okay.
We went back home. He was all excited. He made a total doll. And that was made out of yellow flannel. It wasn't much to look at. He stuffed it with sheep's wool. I was into spinning at the time. But somehow we were encouraged by it. And so the next day he made 3 more dolls.
Let me interject right here a question, because I'm just curious from your perspective. Your partner at this point now is out of work, and you're working all day, and he's sitting at home making dolls. And what was your first reaction to this? Were you supportive? Did you think,
very.
Okay, why? Did you think maybe he could do this for a living? Or did you think, oh, you know what? He loves doing it, so go for it. Have fun.
No, it was like I knew the kind of man he was. He was a highly motivated, competitive, aesthetic perfectionist. And I knew he just needed to find something. He was always trying to find that something. And when this happened, I knew this was going to be it. And I would support him 100%.
So there was a sparkle in his eye.
There always has been the twinkle. Yes. He always had that mischievous twinkle in his eye. I just can't describe it, but it was always magical.
His appreciation of dolls goes back really before this, because I know the story. I've heard this before, that he discovered the book, The Doll, and a couple years ago somewhere. Yeah. And he
had a bookstore.
Yeah. And he would pore over this book. And he was fascinated by one particular photograph, I believe, in there, which was a group of Steiff dolls in a school setting, which we've seen in the past. Was there something about that that stuck in him that he mention at the time that I would like to make those dolls?
It was even before I had met him. And he loved that book, but he couldn't afford it. It was a coffee table book. But what he did do is he went back to where he was living. He did a sketch of that Steiff doll child face, and he kept it with him over the years. I think it was 1972 when he found that book, and it just stuck with him, and he just was intrigued with the idea of maybe making a doll someday.
It took getting fired from the hardware store to
yes.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that so many great artists, creatives, tech people, whatever, it took getting fired from their job that actually led them to entrepreneurship and doing what they really wanted to do. So sometimes it's a good thing.
Keep in mind, Stuart, this wasn't his job. This was just another one of the things like I said, he was always doing this menial labor, not using his amazing talents or skills. And I think it was frustrating to him. He was just biding his time, trying to make money until whatever was going to be his destiny arrived. And it did.
And getting fired was that moment.
It was and it wasn't. Could have been any moment, but it was always coming. And we used to have conversations while we were doing our various jobs of what should we be doing with our talents? What could we be doing? And when he did get fired, he was determined not to ever have a job again where he could get fired from it. So he felt that if he was autonomous, could control everything, and he is a control freak, he wouldn't have to worry about, where his life was going because he would be in full control of steering it.
So you began to realize that you might have something viable here. And what triggered this? What first happened, really, that you saw, hey, people may want these?
Okay, what triggered it was, like I say, he made that first very crude yellow flannel guy. Mm-hmm. He hitchhiked to a town over from Brattleboro to a fabric store, bought a bolt of flesh-colored felt, put it on his shoulder, hitchhiked back with it, and he proceeded to make 3 dolls. They were all little male dolls. Another thing he did was he had seen another book at the Dartmouth College library many years before. He used to love to go to the libraries. And it was a very strange little book by Jeanette Morey. It was written in the late 1950s, and it was about doll makers. And there was one doll maker in there, Grace Lathrop, who was a Niata artist, very early Niata artist. And she had made these fabric dolls that looked sort of like hillbillies. And they were very simple construction, sort of just sewn knees and arms and floppy, kind of primitive. And he remembered that image. So he hitchhiked up to Hanover, found that book, took it out, brought it back. And it wasn't the best picture, but it was enough to keep him inspired as he made 3 more dolls out of the felt he had just bought, and he decided that they should have clothes, so we made pants and shirts and suspenders and gave them wigs, and we're talking in a couple of days, it was growing in leaps and bounds. His vision was taking more and more sophisticated forms. And then a friend who stopped in said, you should sell these over at Sirkin's Craft Gallery, and they were in town. So John took these dolls over, and the store owner really liked them, so we put them on display. And then as John was walking home, a friend drove past and said, hey, they just sold your dolls. So he went home, and he made 6 more and took them in, and they bought them right on the spot. And then he started thinking he should go to other stores. So we did go to the Enchanted Dollhouse. They were interested, gave us a nice leg up. Also, we started doing craft fairs. We would drive to faraway places, Atlanta, wherever these craft
I hope you're
fairs
driving.
were.
You are driving at this point, not hitchhiking.
We are driving. Oh, we're not.
You mentioned John hitchhiking all the time, and I'm like,
yeah, no, we finally got a car.
Drive a car? Okay. All right.
Yeah. Well, he had his Volkswagen, but that died years ago. But we finally did get a car. So it's like you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and reality keeps unfolding. And it unfolded rapidly. When I was reading, again, our book, the one that Christina Godou did with Reverie Publishing back in 2005. She told her story very well, but I was just stunned when I read it the other night, how fast our story unfolded as far as the business goes. I mean, we did so much in the first year as far as not only marketing, but with every doll that was getting made, it was getting more and more technically sophisticated. John was always pushing the envelope, always trying to make it better, more sophisticated technically, aesthetically, artistically. Anyway, after a while, he needed help. And so I quit my job at the Common Ground, and we thought we can support ourselves with this. And then our whole apartment got sort of taken over with this, and it was pretty funny because we always wanted to sound like we were a company. So I would be calling up, companies to order fabrics and things like that. And John would be on the typewriter in the background, typing to make it sound like an office and making telephones ring to sound like, we're going concern here,
And now everybody works from home.
It was a lot of play acting.
Yeah, that's so funny. And that's one of the remarkable things, I watch my parents do the very same thing and really starting off.
Yeah, they
their
were
business
doing it pretty
in their
much the
kitchen,
same time frame. Yeah.
In the same way, yeah. And so at the same time, so it's really fascinating parallel.
That's another thing. I do want to correct that image of mom and pop in the kitchen at the table. It wasn't a big enough kitchen anyway. It took over our apartment, the living room, the dining room,
everything.
The bedroom.
Everything.
The kitchen wasn't big enough to accommodate it.
Okay.
So
I always imagine the kitchen because you tell the story of how you actually used a waffle iron at first for some of your designs.
Well, we'll get to that in a minute because the exploration into molding felt was an epiphany for us.
Well, on that, Susan, was felt always the choice? I mean, did John know this in the beginning? He would make felt dolls, or was he trying to experiment with different things as well?
He always had planned on doing fabric dolls, and he always liked the feeling of felt. His aunt, who worked at Hudson's department store in Detroit, Michigan, used to bring home large sheets of felt from the window decorations, and he used to like making things out of them, making puppet theaters and puppets and such. So he's familiar with the feeling of felt, even as a child. Plus, he knew that the Steiff dolls that he had seen, they were made out of felt. So he just decided to limit his medium considerably because he felt if you worked within constraints, it would inform the work. And just with limited options, the challenges are greater. And so he wanted to take his medium to the fullest extent it could be taken. And that's where the whole adventure of molding felt started. Once we were able to see some Lenchi dolls, collection of Jean Schramm at the Enchanted Dollhouse, we knew that was where we were going to take this, because he was just so impressed with the Lenchi dolls and the way they had these beautiful molded faces, no center seam, no button eyes. And so that's when we started experimenting with how do you do it. Unfortunately, there was no book. It's not like, all these people who do wonderful felting animals and things nowadays. There's classes, there's books, but there was nothing except the Dorothy Coleman book on Lenchi had some very crude theories on how they did it, but she didn't know either. So it was trial and error. Jean Schramm also let us borrow some of the dolls in her collection. We took them to the hospital in Brattleboro and asked if they would be willing to X-ray them. We thought we could maybe learn some things that way. And then when we asked how much that would be, they said, "Oh, no charge. Actually, why don't you just give a little talk next month to our radiologists about this cool thing?" And so we did, and it was fun. And we still have the X-rays. Well, that was how John's mind worked. He would do whatever it took to figure out things.
It seems the Lenchis, too, I can kind of relate to your dolls evolved as well over time and being more colorful. And Lenchis were very colorful and compared to some of the other felt dolls out there. And so maybe that was an inspiration as well from the Lenchi perspective of helping John see, wow, look at how you can utilize so many different colors in one doll.
He also liked the way many of the costumes were felt. They didn't use a myriad of other fabrics necessarily. So initially, a lot of our costumes, we used primarily felt for the costumes, with some organdy and muslin and cotton perhaps. But it was mostly, using all these, like you say, wonderful colors of felt. And Lenchi was a huge inspiration for that. I mean, Elena Schivini, who was called Madame Lenchi eventually, she always said one should always use good taste. And John really liked that. He agreed with that. You can be colorful, but tasteful.
Interesting. I like that quote. That's nice. And I think that really does sum up a lot of your designs over the years. So it clearly resonated with John and you in that philosophy inspiring all of your designs of the future. So you've reached this point now. You are getting orders. They're coming in. Your house is overwhelmed. You have nowhere to sit, and you have to mimic typing in the background to sound like an office.
Then do you know what we did?
What?
Then we had a baby.
Okay. To further complicate everything.
Right. We had our first child while we were still in that tiny apartment, still with no place to live much.
So how many years into this did you decide we need to actually have a facility?
Well, let's see. We started in 76. Lillian was born in 79. So she was 3 when we decided we had to find something different. And so that different was that we moved across the state border into New York State, and we bought a small house in Cambridge, New York. Now, the reason we knew about that small house in Cambridge, New York, is because we used to drive our dolls with no stuffing in them over to Middle Falls, New York, because we knew some people who had a stuffing machine. It was actually a small company that made stuffed things, and they allowed us to use their stuffing machine. So we'd load empty dolls into the car, and then we'd go to the Middle Falls stuffing machine. We'd stuff them up, stack them in like firewood, bring them back, finish them, close the holes, paint them, dress them, etc. So that's how we found out about Cambridge, New York, because we had to pass through it, and we thought it was a charming little village, had affordable real estate, and could be a good place to grow. So we purchased a house. We had another child. We still were making the dolls in a back bedroom of the house, and we were employing people. We had about 3-4 people who would come in. And then we had about 3 people that would come and pick up parts to sew the costumes and take them to their homes to do that. But we knew we needed to make this more real. So in that village, there was a very large Victorian industrial building. It used to be a seed company. And they were renting out spaces in it, the people that owned it. So we rented a few spaces, about maybe 1,000 square feet, 2,000 square feet. And then within about a year and a half, we had pretty much taken over all of it, which was 10,000 square feet. And we now had 55 production workers.
Wow.
So that all happened between 79 and 83.
You grew fast.
John was incredibly driven, incredibly ambitious. He was determined to be the toppermost of the poppermost. He wanted to be like all of the older golden age toy companies, Catholic Cruz, the Jumeaus, the Brews, Steiff. He wanted to be that. He didn't want to be John and Susan sitting at the kitchen table, hand-making dolls. He wanted to be the puppet master. He wanted to have the visions, and he wanted to have people that, not unlike Walt Disney. He was the visionary, and he found talented people to help him realize those visions. And I happened to be one of his puppets. However, I was the chief puppet.
I want to interject one thing, because it's really interesting to me how you said that you had local village people that were actually working from their homes, coming in every day, picking up things, going home, working on them, and bringing them back. And if you go back to the history of many of the German and French doll companies, they did the same thing. Did you know that? They would have...
We did know that.
Yeah.
So that's why he didn't mind it, because he thought everybody starts that way, right? The reason we had to bring it in-house and not have any cottage workers, so to speak, it was much harder to control the high standard and quality that he wanted. Too often we would get back something that wasn't the quality that he wanted. Whereas if it was under our watchful eye, especially mine, we could cut off any mistakes from happening or going too far and wasting time and money and materials. So yeah, he loved having total control. And the way to have that was to have it right under his watchful eye.
That's so interesting. John had a level of genius within him. And as many geniuses are, they're very complex characters, and they want to control so much. And I imagine he was complex in a lot of cases. And you were the perfect partner in this because you're steady. And I want to talk about you for a moment, if I can, Susan, because I think that over the history of our John Wright's dolls, that John himself has been kind of the focus, and he's been the person who people recognize and think of when it comes to our John Wright dolls. But you have been a really important part of this, and I don't think our John Wright Dolls, the company, would be, I know it wouldn't be what it is today without you. I think that John's genius, I wonder sometimes how much would have actually ever been produced, because he just would have wanted to keep perfecting things. My point being, you were like, you mentioned Emile Jumeau and how John wanted to be a figure like this. But a lot of people don't realize that behind Emile Jumeau was his wife, Ernestine Jumeau, who was critical in that company, in the costume design, in planning, and in keeping Emile Jameau focused. And so you were very similar to that. So can you tell me a little bit about what you did behind the scenes as the partnership in this?
Okay, well, I used to always think of myself as an artist. That was my strength, my skill. But once I started making dolls with John, I realized I was a creative engineer. I did not know this, but I loved the challenge of figuring out how to do things. So John would propose something, and I'd think, okay, the difficult, I'll do right now. The impossible will take a little while. But I could always figure it out, and I always enjoyed the challenges. I mean, he dreamed them, and I made them real. Mm-hmm. So we needed each other. Mm-hmm. We were incomplete, one without the other. He used to like to say, we're like Siamese twins. We're attached at the head. We don't have to talk. We just, pass ideas, back and forth with just looking at a problem.
I think it's important for people to know this because you've been at the forefront, certainly at conventions and talking and meeting with people. But in the end, it was John who kind of got the spotlight. And you have been a really integral part of this whole thing. The engineer behind this is equally as important as an artist. So thank you for everything that you've done. And I hope this moment is a chance for people to kind of realize and appreciate your role in this as well. So by the mid 80s, you're now reaching a point where the company is absolutely taking off. You have 55 employees. You have a facility now. I think you were starting to do New York Toy Fair at this point as well, correct?
Yes.
So this was really the turning point when everything started happening. Was it exciting? Was it nerve-wracking? Were you filled with anxiety? How did you feel at this moment?
Well, right from the beginning, when we just started to want to mold felt, it was exciting, and it never stopped being exciting, and it still is. I used to think that I was going to have a different life. I was going to be a fine artist. I was going to show in galleries, painting, sculpture, that sort of thing. And I took a road unexpected and never looked back. And there are zero regrets because every day was a new adventure. It was exciting. And it used all my talents. It was so fulfilling and rewarding. And I had the perfect part. It was like every day was art day at school. We both loved art day when we were kids. And we got to do it every day, we said.
This was the point, too, I believe, that in the mid-'80s, you began to explore the idea of licensing. Am I correct in that?
Yes, correct.
And what was the first thing that you actually licensed?
Well, the first thing that led us to licensing was John wanted to do Christopher Robin and Winnie the Pooh, based on the books that E.H. Shepard had illustrated. Disney had done its cartoon by then, and then we, through lots of contacting people and research, we found out that Disney owned the rights to the original classic Winnie the Pooh books and art. So we had to go through them in order to be able to do it. So we found out the right people to contact in New York City. He put me on a train with my Perry Ellis jacket on. He had me go meet with the chief guy. I can't remember what his name was even. We went out for a 3-martini lunch. And when we went back to his office, he says, "So what is it that you want?" I said, "Well, I'm not leaving here until I have a license to do Winnie the Pooh and Christopher Robin." And he says, "Okay, let's do it." So there it was. What they liked about it was a different branch of a license that they had. It was going to be able to be taken in a whole nother direction they never even thought of. Classic. And because we did classic Winnie the Pooh, they started a whole branch that was called Classic Winnie the Pooh. And they were, licensing other things, figurines, jewelry, games based on classic Winnie the Pooh, stationery, greeting cards, classic Winnie the Pooh. It was something that they never even thought of tapping until John Wright came along and told them there is a market for this.
You probably introduced to them, too, the concept of high-end collectible dolls versus rather than just novelty things.
They were just stunned with the prices we were able to get. I mean, at that time, a Christopher Robin doll was $350. That was a lot for a doll. And they were just really surprised at that. And so our relationship with Disney grew from that beginning. And then they wanted us to be able to do Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And that was even more successful. We did a lot of Pooh over the 18 years we worked with Disney. But Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, they were really surprised that you could sell these sets for $3,500. And they ordered a special exclusive set that had pickaxes to put it in their catalog. And they couldn't believe that they sold them out. There was only going to be 50 of them, and they sold them out like in about a week, $3,500 each.
Yeah.
So, and then we got to meet Michael Eisner at the opening of the flagship Disney store on Fifth Avenue, and that was exciting, and he was excited. We were doing Geppetto and Pinocchio then, and finishing up Snow White, and still continuing Winnie the Pooh. So they really appreciated that we were kind of bringing them into the collector doll industry. And then they started having their teddy bear and doll conventions at Disney World, and we were involved in that as well. So it was a fun ride.
I remember a quote you said, "We're the company that Pooh built." And I always loved that quote.
Yes.
You've often told me that John actually fell in love with the idea of licensing and finding some new areas to go into and talk to people about the possibility of getting the license to make the dolls. And a lot of it was oriented towards nostalgia. And I felt like I could always see both you and John behind the choices of what you went for as being nostalgic items that you related to and understood, and you wanted to create that. So what were some of the other licensing projects that you did that you recall were really interesting?
Well, let me just address why he wanted licensing so much. He always wanted to be authentic. He didn't want to do Boy with Bear. He wanted it to be the Winnie the Pooh, the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. So it had to be the one. That was always important to him. Licensing also, he was noticing that markets would get tired. And to keep new markets coming in, you had to branch out. Licensing was always taking us into other markets. So all of a sudden we're in the Disney market, or we're in the Beatrix Potter market, which, as you were saying, what other licenses? Beatrix Potter was one that he very much wanted to be doing. We always loved the Beatrix Potter illustrations. But it always opened up new markets for us. Doing Disney and Beatrix Potter opened up the Japanese market enormously to our work. And we had a year-long exhibition, traveling exhibition there. That was very exciting. Went over to Japan a few times for various signings and exhibits and whatnot. And people would line up around the block to meet our John Wright. So it was very giddy times. But again, new markets. Raggedy Ann, Johnny Gruelle's wonderful illustrations opened up the Raggedy Ann market. Paddington Bear, that was another fun one. Again, another market. Bears. So a lot of it was we loved the imagery, but a lot of it was we had to stay fresh and we had to keep growing our market because we wanted to keep this growing.
Right.
So we didn't fence ourselves into, our John Wright dolls, and they all look the same, and that's a John Wright doll, and we love them, and that's our little pond, and we swim around in it. So that had a lot to do with the licensing desire also.
And I think we can see this progression of the company and how you were regional, maybe New England, New York State, up in that area you were first known.
I'm going to refute that one, Stuart. It's always, what do they say, a prophet is always unappreciated in his own town or whatever.
Right.
We never had hardly, except for the Enchanted Dollhouse, no Vermont stores, not too many New England stores. We instantly were very national, and then we got very international. So we didn't start out in little craft scenes. We went to the biggest craft scenes, the biggest traveling. We grew it, went into UFDC, Toy Fair.
But the international came more with some of the licensing.
Well, that's true. With the licensing. The licensing definitely opened that market up for us.
And I know that you are big in Japan, not to quote the song, but you were definitely big in Japan, still are in many cases. And I always love the story. You told me this once before, and it's amazing that you actually sent over that first doll that John ever made that you talked about earlier in this episode. You put it on exhibit there. They wanted it.
That was really funny. We were shipping over quite a few pieces, and they had other pieces they had bought. But then they asked if we'd be willing to ship over the very first doll, the yellow flannel one that John had made. And they said, if you do, we will insure it for $1 million. So, okay, you can have it.
I could see John doing like in Austin Powers, $1 million.
Yes.
You're probably hoping it would get lost in that point.
Really. We'll be all set.
So, that's a great story and amazing. Getting back to the licensing a little bit more, I think what's important for people to understand is you weren't just working to license with large corporations. license. In some cases, you were working with the family members who controlled the licensing. And one example I know intimately because I helped put you two together, and that is the family of Shirley Temple and creating the Shirley Temple doll. So you have the corporate like Disney, but then sometimes you're sitting in the living rooms of family members. How different is that trying to get a licensing deal?
It's much harder because they have such a personal connection to it. Whereas with a corporate licensing, they're doing a job. They have to have quality standards, et cetera, and design reviews. But when you're dealing with the families, it's definitely more intimate, and they're very possessive of the imagery. And they're very hard to please sometimes to get it just right, to be what they think that individual or that character or whatever should look like. So it was very challenging. I think we succeeded reasonably well with Shirley Temple's family. We had a good time doing it, enjoyed going to the auction that Theriault had with all her costumes and her doll collection. It was just wonderful. Another family that we dealt with was the Tasha Tudor family, because we wanted to do some of the characters of Tasha Tudor's stories. As you know, she lived in Vermont. She had already passed away, so we were dealing with her son, and he was a very determined New England man. It was hard to win him over, but we did. And I think John and I were able to charm him into thinking that we do right by the property. And they gave us very reasonable terms as far as royalties and everything. And once we won them over, they were fine to deal with.
Was there ever a family or a situation where it was so emotional you just couldn't break through and you never made the doll?
I don't think so. I can't think of any. There have been a few times we were approached by licensors to see if we were interested. One of them was Game of Thrones. But we knew that that was just too huge of a thing. And by the time we were able to develop it, the series would be over. So why bother, you know? But I think we could have done it.
But does that really fit into conceptually the idea of our John Wright dolls? I mean, you'd be breaking out of a, no pun intended, mold here of what I would term more childhood nostalgia.
Well, I mean, that came later, much, much later in our career. We had already done Wizard of Oz very well. And I think that was what attracted their attention, because the realism of those characters from the Wizard of Oz, it looked like we could be very true and accurate to those characters. That
would have been an interesting line. It would have shocked me if I saw our John Wright.
Yeah, that's why he wanted to do it. John always wanted to do the unexpected.
That would definitely be. I would be shocked. Wow. That's a great backstory of something that never got produced. One of the things that I think, and we just talked about the art of nostalgia that I think you've created, and a lot of it relating to childhood. One of the things that has been remarkable about your dolls, and let me put it into the context of 20th century artist dolls and 21st century artist dolls, that they tend to be, in many cases, not all, but in many cases, separate markets from the antique doll collecting market. You are one of the very, very few, and certainly the most prominent of all of these companies that were producing dolls during this last 50 years that has, I think, the singular strongest appeal in the antique doll market of any doll artist out there. And I think you recognize and know this as well. What do you think? Why?
I think the answer is obvious. It's because we always produced our dolls in the spirit of the antique dolls. The great makers, like I say, from the golden age of dolls and toys. We always aspired to that same standard of quality and the appearance. It's almost like we wanted our dolls to feel like they were antiques, as opposed to new dolls that would become antiques. But we didn't do that aging thing and all that fake dyeing in tea fabrics. Not that kind of aging, but just the feel of them had more of a techniques of some of the older work.
And you nailed it there with how it could be very comfortable sitting with an antique doll. And often when I'm in homes of collectors, I would say 80% of every collection I go into has some R. John Wright doll in there, and a lot of them have many. And they don't put them in a cordoned off section of those are my contemporary artist dolls. R. John Wright dolls generally blend in with the antiques. So you'll see them sitting with Lenchies and Kathy Cruz and Steiff, and you'll see them with German Biss dolls and posed in vignettes
Right,
and things. They fit perfectly.
Those dolls John looked at a lot, and we even have a number in our collection over the years. He looked at all those wonderful bisque faces and the bruise, and he was very influenced by the feeling and look of those dolls. Even though we were using a different medium, he was very interested in the look.
And I think there was some other thing too, Susan, that I've noticed in this, where the sweet sauce was in all of this with you and relating to collectors, where they could identify with these dolls, was also the fact that you didn't produce them so limited. They were so scarce that nobody could really collect, because collectors need to collect. But you didn't overproduce them either. You made them limited quantities, but just enough that you could spread them around to different collectors and have that recognition. I would say that that's another part of it too.
I think so. I think the largest editions we ever made were the Winnie the Pooh ones. I mean, the first classic Pooh we did, there was 5,000 of those and 3,500 of the Pocket Pooh series, each animal. And so those are large editions. The Snow White edition was pretty large, Geppetto. But we usually
mostly you
tried
kept
to
it
keep
reasonable.
them in the 500, 250 range sometimes, you know?
Yeah. So enough to have a collecting, let's call it market, because if you don't have things to buy, there's no collecting. So you need things. And so you did enough. And it allowed also for these items to circulate out on the secondary market as well, where a lot of the contemporary artists were producing a few because they were staying in their living rooms, which you abandoned years ago and went into production. They were staying in their living rooms and basically trying to do more cottage work. And they could only produce a few. So you can't really develop a connection with collectors in that same way you did. And it was a perfect balance of producing enough for collectors to develop a market, but not too much where it was just like overrun.
Well, also, you need to do quantity in order to create a legacy. Unless you're some famous artist, Picasso or something. In our field, quantity and quality and brand will hopefully mean John Wright has legacy, like you were saying earlier. Hopefully decades, centuries from now even, maybe. There's enough still in existence so that it'll survive. Something will survive and be desired, just like the antique dolls are, nowadays so desirable.
What do you think will be the rarest R. John Wright doll of the future then, if you're talking about this, in 100 years from now? You know the quantities, you know what's sold. And, it's an interesting question because Gemot we've been talking about, and John always admiring Emile Gemot. The most desirable Gemot doll now are his series Fantastiques, which were actually, interestingly enough, commercial failures and never even put into production. Yeah. So
they were going out on a limb with those character faces.
Exactly. So is there something that you think will become the rarest R. John Wright doll in the world?
That's a hard question, Stuart. And it isn't necessarily quantity that will determine it. It has to be, I don't know. I'll ask you, do you think there's any one doll that in our body of work that might be sought after?
Probably the one that I don't even know about and haven't seen, that you didn't maybe sell a lot of them, and I haven't really encountered them all that much. So I would say some of his early work, which people tend not to think of in the same way. I don't want to say they're less popular. They're more sophisticated in the collectors that they appeal to. And I think his early works will be looked back upon in 100 years as being some of the most important things.
I think that could be so. I mean, they weren't certainly having the technical sophistication that we ended up being able to do, but there is a certain personal touch and whimsy to them. And you can feel the struggle of the artist, trying this, trying that, experimentation. So many of the early dolls are almost one of a kinds, even though they were the same similar character. There would be little nuances from doll to doll to doll. So just because of the brand that we've created, having the early dolls so that you can actually possess that process and that struggle. To a true R. John Wright collector, that would be a very valuable thing to have because it has the hand of the artist very much in it.
And that's what I think how the story is going to be told later on in generations. And they will start to be really coveted as the early origins of our John Wright. You know, it has me thinking, Susan, the last episode I recorded was an interview with Dr. Shirley Mueller, and she wrote a book called Inside the Head of a Collector. And it's a fascinating study. And one of the things in there was her defining what collecting truly is. And she says, we are not collecting as much as we are collecting sets. And that is, we are trying to complete sets of things. So you're saying that. You said it a few minutes ago that true collectors of our John Wright dolls will want to complete the set. And that is including having these earlier pieces that will have, I think, a renaissance over time.
I agree with you. It's part of the story to have some of the early pieces. If I were collecting our John Wright dolls, which I have been, I guess, but I would definitely want different periods represented. At our 40th year celebration convention, John put together an exhibit where he had pedestals. Each pedestal had a year, 40 pedestals, and he chose one piece to represent that year quintessentially, and that's what was in the exhibit. And I think if I was a collector, I would want those pieces for sure.
Absolutely. That sounds like a fantastic exhibit. And it's unique, I guess, because it was John's hand-selected what he felt were the most important pieces.
And on pedestal number 1, of course, was the first doll, the yellow flannel guy sitting there. He was on pedestal number 1, and some collectors should really want that someday.
Well, we may have a surprise for them. So over this time, we talked about production and numbers, and, you know, you talked about your highest production might have been 5,000, but mostly I always think of our John Wrights being in that 100 to 1,000 range is what you would come up with as the quantity. You must have been offered a lot of opportunities out there, from investment bankers to investors to other companies, to take our John Wright to another level of distribution. That is, to be producing them overseas and doing 50,000. You never took the bait. You never went for it. Why?
No. Well, because John would lose control. And as I've said, he always needed total control of his name, of his work, of his vision. We were seeing so many small companies like us going for that bait, so-called, and watching them totally lose what it was that they had built. And it becoming something else. And he definitely did not want to ever see it become something else. He wanted it to be his vision, and he stuck with it right to the end.
He was a purist in this. You both were, and I commend you for what you've done. It's remarkable. The temptation had to be real at certain times, but you kept to it. You know, I think what a lot of people don't understand from the perspective of a small business, and you and I have both run small businesses, is that it's not just the romantic creative stuff that you're doing every day. It's all the other things. You're doing human resources. You're doing accounting. You're doing everything. And it's a lot of work. So I think that's the biggest part of the temptation of companies to go even bigger. In John's case, he wanted control. I think in most people's cases, they don't want that control. They just want to do the creative, and that's it, and go home at night.
Right. He was just wanting to do the creative. You can bet he offloaded whenever he could. He was good at delegating, and quite often he would delegate to me. And then I would find someone to delegate all of the inner workings of a business too. So he wanted to retain control of the big picture, and he did.
Well, Susan, on that, were there times that, I don't know if this is personal, but was he difficult at times to work with?
Very. He was a taskmaker.
Yeah.
He was a genius. He was volatile. He had high anxiety when things weren't going right. Had to talk him off the ledge many times. But that's just how these creative types are, you know. But he always was seeking autonomy, perfection. So how could he not be somewhat?
Right. I mean,
challenging
geniuses,
at times.
Yeah, geniuses can be complex. And that's why your partnership was so important, because I imagine there were many dolls that John kept trying to perfect. And you realize he's never going to be happy with this in a classic sense unless we just do it. And you had to force him to just say, we're getting this done. It's going out. You were perfect, both of you together.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about his perfection ruts, because I would have them too. I mean, I did a whole lot of the design and pattern making and all that. And I'd get into this over perfecting it rut. And John would help me get out of it. He'd say, okay, what you have going here is very good. What you had going before this was as good. You're losing something here. So let's rewind the tape. Let's not lose what's good. And see, we were good at talking each other from the ledge. So he wasn't just a crazy perfectionist. He was a good, astute observer. He did know when things were where they should be. It's hard to describe our dynamic.
Okay. I always thought of you as the pragmatic driver. You just push the stuff forward.
Usually I could be.
Yeah. You never took the temptation to grow to that next level of mass production overseas or anything along those lines. And a lot of it too, you mentioned John liked the control. You liked the creative process of having that control. And part of it too created this very unique company that had a lot of pride in being, I guess we could call it made in Vermont, and that you were hiring local people. Were you hiring trained people or were you teaching them? How did you build at one time 55 people and what they were doing in this company? You couldn't just go find people locally who knew how to make felt dolls.
Okay. The most important thing in being able to find skilled labor was having good processes and systems. And that is the hardest part of any business, especially what we were doing. Anybody can make one and it can look pretty good. You can make a prototype. You can figure it out. But getting it into production, that was the biggest challenge. And that was the role I generally played. Once we designed that prototype, all the systems had to be, I don't want to say idiot proofed, but break it down to step 1, step 2, step 3. Okay. You do this, you do that, you get this. Okay. And that is a very difficult thing to do. It's like you have a brain and you have lots of arms and you have to communicate with each one of those arms. So each one of our production workers was like an arm to the brain, and we had to make sure we could communicate with it so that it could do exactly what we wanted it to do. And they could create in multiples dolls that looked just as good or better than the prototype. And they can do that because they are following the directions. But they have to have the skills that were required, good hand-eye coordination. They had to have reasonably good judgment. They had to have good communication skills. They had to be observant. They had to know what they were being taught and adhere to it. So, I mean, yeah, there was certain skills, but they didn't come to us as, oh, I make dolls all the time, because those kind of people have too much ego. They want to make their dolls, their teddy bears. They want to do their craft. So we had talented people, creative people that didn't mind subordinating themselves to our vision. Yeah. We became a wonderful team. We've had people working with us for decades, and they're very skilled.
Incredible. How long did it take? So you and John come up with an idea, or John comes up with an idea, or you do it together. Take us down the line of how long it would take till that doll came out and goes into the box.
Some of our collectors used to complain that John was the late John Wright. Because some of the waits would be interminably long when we would announce the concept and then when it would be in the box. But just getting to the prototype stage was arduous. You have to come up with the idea. And then you have to do drawings and find illustrations and inspirations. Then you have to do sculpts. And the sculpts weren't just a face. They were, as we went on, we were molding arms and legs also. And so you had to do full body sculpts, and then those sculpts had to be honed, sent off to the foundry, come back, have to be machined, have to be fitted to our presses and all this stuff. There's a whole lot of technical things that had to be done. Researching fabrics, materials, raw materials, designing accessories, working out all the plans of how to do all that. Costuming. We do sheets with fabrics stapled to them. You know, this is going to be the fabrics that we're going to use for the costume. This is what we're going to use for the wig. This is the coloration we want. So just that process would take huge amounts of time. And we would sometimes have multiple projects going at a time. And so they're sort of leapfrogging along. You're getting this one to the prototype stage, and then you're working it through all the production systems to get it ready to put it on the production floor. And then you have to oversee and train and make sure people know what they're doing and how they're doing it. And at the same time, you're back in the design room, John and I, working on all our next possible project while keeping an eye on the current project that's on the production floor. It was exhausting.
It sounds like it, yeah, because you always had to stay a step ahead. You didn't just make something or
right.
create
We couldn't
something.
just send it off to a factory in China and say, go with it. We'd
figure this
take it
out.
over to production, and we'd have to oversee it ourselves.
Was there ever anything that you realized, gosh, we just can't make this? It's just not possible from an engineering standpoint. Or did you manage to do it, all of it?
John would say jump, and I'd say how high.
Okay, you figured it out. So tell me, what was the worst, I don't want to call it nightmare, but definitely the most trying piece you've ever had to create from an engineering standpoint? I suspect one, but
possibly The Wizard of Oz Tin Man.
That's it. That's exactly the one I was going to pick. I can't believe it.
That was an incredibly challenging project.
Because it's very unique in how it's constructed.
Right, because it's a costume. I mean, it's a finished felt doll, articulated with jointed knees and everything under the costume. And the costume is basically the same as what they had in the movie, because we found out it was made out of buckram covered with silver paint. Well, ours is buckram covered with silver paper. And we put all those little rivets in and all that. And the construction is exactly the same, and the elbow joints, and getting his face to have that nice metallic look, but not losing that wonderful look that the Tin Man had of benevolence. And everything that could go wrong kept going wrong, but we got there.
I just had a feeling of my examination of your dolls over the years that was the one. So maybe we've just catapulted this doll into becoming the most coveted R. John Wright doll in the world, because people now know it was the most difficult to make.
And it's one of the ones we're most proud of.
It should be. That whole set is truly remarkable.
Oh, definitely.
And, yeah.
The witch, she gave us a lot of trouble, too. The ones that are most troubling are the most satisfying, don't you think? Those are the victories, the ones that come easy.
Yeah, there's a certain truth to that for sure, but we're from two different worlds as far as the businesses go. So I would say the ones that are the most difficult may not be the most satisfying for me.
Well, actually, John did love clever solutions. Like he always loved to tell the story of, in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs movie, Disney's favorite scene was when the witch gets into the boat and paddles it through the fog. And that was the easiest scene in the whole movie, and yet it got a standing ovation when it premiered. John loved that story. And so he didn't want it to always be about labor. He loved it whenever we could find clever ways of getting maximum effect for minimum effort. He was practical that way, too. He didn't want to grunt all the time.
Okay. Well, I like that backstory. That's wonderful. Susan, going into a little bit more of a personal contemporary times, it was some years ago that John was diagnosed with Parkinson's, which, given his use of hands and his need of sketching and the artwork that he was doing, was perhaps the worst disease to ever be diagnosed with. And yet he pushed through it. He persevered as best he could with you along his side through all these years. Can you tell, what was it like from the creative process as he was progressing over a number of years with the Parkinson's?
Well, fortunately, throughout our career, we both contributed to the sculpting. And as you know, we even used the talents of others, like Martha Armstrong Hand for the faces of the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, because she was enormously talented. She had worked for Mattel. She was married to David Hand, the director of Snow White. So it seemed John loved that connection. It didn't rely just on his ability to do the sculpting, which was fortunate because he was able to still oversee the work. And he could tell me, okay, I want you to be working on the Shirley face. Even during Shirley's face, he was starting to have issues. And we would continually work very closely on the sculpts together with him, reviewing, criticizing, trying to make it right. So that didn't suffer as much because of our dual skills that we both shared. And he didn't even have the tremors that much. He had atypical Parkinson's. It was his mind that was going, Stuart, and that was the saddest, hardest part for me because I could sense his frustration. All the skills he had learned and mastered were slipping away from him mentally, because it wasn't about tremors or movement so much as almost cognitive skills were closing down.
But he kept the twinkle.
He did. His sense of humor was right to the end. He still was making jokes in the hospital to the nurses and everything. So, he was a special guy. He really was. And in some ways, I'm glad he exited the stage when he did, because he would have not wanted to have been a burden to me or the children. And he always had a joke that he was afraid that he was going to die young. 78, in my opinion, is young. He left way too soon, but he still was himself. He left under his own conditions. Yeah.
And bringing so much to the world over 50 years, it's incredible. The contributions that will build on his legacy. And as I said before, his energy lives on in these dolls. I think that's what he would want. The last thing you both worked on together is soon going to be released. And it's really interesting. And I think a little bit off of the chart of what I would call childhood nostalgia, and that is your final work alongside John is Rudolph Valentino. What's
he
behind
wanted
this?
To do Valentino for a long time. When we were doing Hollywood Legends series, Charlie Chaplin, and we considered The Wizard of Oz part of that as well, Baby Peggy, Shirley Temple. And so Valentino was definitely in the queue. And we had done some preliminary work and choosing fabrics and the look and some sketches and whatnot. So that is just something that I felt that he was invested in enough that I should finish it. And it's going to be limited to only 10 pieces. And it will probably be a lottery system for who gets them.
Wow.
So.
Okay, well that's...
And I'll be doing a lot of the work myself personally on them because it's such a small edition. It's kind of hard to do a production on it.
But it is an example of, it will be the example that was, the last thing that John really, you're finishing it, but it was the last thing John was involved in from the start.
In the last months of his life, we would be sitting and looking at these rough prototypes and choosing fabrics and talking about it. So these last two projects that we're producing right now will be the Valentino, very limited, and Captain Hook. I'm not sure how many of those we will be making of the 250 edition it was supposed to be. Right. Probably nothing even close to that.
You talk about Lenchi being such an influence. I think it's full circle where Lenchi actually produced a Valentino doll, one of the most sought after and fantastic dolls ever created. And this will be one of the final ones from John as well.
The Valentino that Lenchi created. We knew about that ages ago. And John always wanted to do a Valentino. And because he was so competitive, of course he wanted it to be much better. So whenever he saw somebody doing something that he wanted to do, he was determined to still do it, but do it much better.
Better. That's funny. I've only seen about 10 Lenchi Valentinos in my career, so maybe
that might have been one of those oddball things. Yeah,
exactly. And you're going to do 10, so maybe you're going to match that. So I think a lot of people have had questions for you and have wondered about this. And I'm sure people have approached you and you've kind of kept it a bit under wraps. And a lot of it being you just didn't know where you were going with this. But I know people are curious. What are you deciding on as far as the future of our John Wright dolls?
Well, fortunately, in the last years of John's life, we had many discussions of exit strategies. I think we were realizing that it is an exhausting pursuit to keep this creative at the pitch that our collectors were used to. And so we had been thinking, how will we kind of close it down? One thing we were determined not to do was sell the business to someone who didn't have enough of our vision or couldn't do it without having us stay on in a consulting capacity, which we did not want to do. So we didn't want to sell the business and watch mediocre versions of what we had done over the last 50 years start being cranked out. I think some great companies like the Lenchi company in the 80s, what they were doing couldn't begin to compare, which
it was
the early
totally different
1930s Lenchis, or even Catha Cruz. We didn't want to see that happen with our vision. So we decided we would probably just liquidate, shut down, and that's why we started selling artist proofs, low numbers, things that had been in our vault for many, many, many years, and just trying to figure out how we could end it. And now, with the absence of John, I need to go forward with that plan alone. It's frightening. My children are very supportive. I mean, how do you say goodbye to 53 years of your life and engage in a whole nother adventure? But since I'm going to live to 100, I really should figure out what I'm going to do.
So far, so good.
Yep. I may go back to first creative pursuits of fine art, painting, sculpture. Who knows? Another Grandma Moses. Who knows? I don't know.
You're winding down this
It's
chapter.
years.
Yeah.
It's just a number of a few years, I think, before we will be saying definitely goodbye. And I will exit the stage and leave whatever we've built to posterity.
I don't think there's any exit of the stage, Susan. I think this is not a closure. This is just a new beginning. And now the legacy and the iconic status of these dolls, as I said, will continue on for generations, and new stories and a new history will be written about R. John Wright. It's just that you won't be creating anything new, but people will be reliving the greatness of what you have achieved.
And I appreciate that word you keep using, Stuart, legacy. It was so important to John, and that's why the day he passed away, my first desire was to make sure that everybody in the industry, in his world, knew of his passing and to do the theater of it the way he would want, with his memorial service and obituaries and all that. I felt like he was over my shoulder, kind of guiding me through that journey. And having this podcast is one more of those special opportunities that he would definitely be very, very pleased with and wanting to happen.
And one thing he wanted that you both decided on that is coming to fruition now is you decided to offer all of your personal archives, not just the company archives, but your personal archives, of which you kept virtually one of everything you ever made. And you decided to have Theriault auction this on March 7th. So coming up very soon. Can you talk to us about what this collection consists of and what it meant to you and John and how you would like it to go on to new collectors?
Well, John was always impressed with the way the Steiff Company had samples of one of everything they've ever made. We did have an opportunity of seeing that archive, and it was most impressive. And we had always tried to save one of everything we ever made. Unfortunately, we let a lot of prototypes and number ones from the very earliest days be sold, but we've gotten some of them back. But we always made sure we saved at least an example. But then as we got a little further down the road, John always made sure that the number one, or the artist proof number one, was in the vault. And that collection grew to be over 500 pieces, because that's how many different designs we've done over the last 50 years. We've been pretty prolific, and it meant a lot to him to have that collection. I don't know what his plans were initially. He just wanted it for posterity, for it to be there, a curated collection that had not been in the hands of others and that we had preserved and properly in a vault, climate controlled, in their original boxes and the whole thing.
And I think there's also going to be included in this, for some of the dolls, even the original sketches that you did with it. So people will have something very unique that they can treasure.
So we have saved a fair amount of the sketches, and they've been filed away in different files, and I keep discovering all of these original things. And I'm so pleased when I see them. I think, oh, that takes me back to when we started that project. So they're very special.
There's nothing better than collectors actually having some of these and preserving them along with that special archive doll that John kept. So I think it will go a long way to telling the story in the future, and collectors will be the best storytellers of this incredible legacy, as we've been saying. So I do know that you worked out with Florence that lot number one of this auction will actually end up being that very first doll that John made.
It will be. It was wrenching to make that decision, but I think John would like it being out there and being coveted by someone.
I appreciate that. And I think people will love to see this, and to have it documented in the book that will be done of all of these dolls will be really important. But I'm just telling you now, Susan, I'm not insuring it for $1 million.
You're not?
No.
2 million then, right?
But if somebody will bid $1 million, I'll be happy to take it. So Don't worry. Susan, I want to thank you, but I want to end this with one last question for you. And that will be, how do you feel John would like to be remembered?
He would like to be remembered as someone who would always ask, why not? When someone said it couldn't be done. Mm-hmm. He always enjoyed challenges, and his whimsicalness, his great sense of irony and wit, and his charm. I mean, this is how I remember him. How he wants to be remembered, I think he just wants to be remembered. He definitely doesn't want to fade away. And hopefully, with the help of people like you and Theriault and all his collectors, that will not be the fate of our John Wright. He will live on.
I know that it won't be the fate, and he will inspire generations to look at dolls from a whole new perspective. And the name our John Wright will clearly live on, and collectors will be the storytellers and provide this avenue for, again, 200 years from now, people uttering those words and saying, what a great genius he was. And hopefully your name as well, Susan. Just like Ernestine Jumeau, the wife of Émile Jumeau, was sort of in the backwaters of history for a long time until it was uncovered that she was actually a critical part of the entire Jumeau company. So you as well. And thank you for being here today. Thank you, Stuart, for everything that you've done. Behind every great man.
They say, behind every great man
is a smarter woman.
Very enjoyable.
I really enjoyed this too. And you are fantastic. And thank you for sharing. I know some of this was deeply personal, but I think really important in helping people connect to the dolls. And you've been just fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Curious Collector. The Curious Collector is hosted by Stuart Holbrook and produced by Tammy Theriault. We invite you to follow us on social media and feel free to leave any questions you have for Stuart on Facebook at Stuart Holbrook-Theriault or follow the Theriault Company Facebook page. And you can stay up to date with the latest auctions and events at Theriaults.com. We'll talk to you on the next episode of The Curious Collector.